Good morning, everybody. Good to see you all. And welcome to the Kli Yakar on Parshat Korach. Now, today's shiur is going to be somewhat different from our previous shiurim of the Kli Yakar. And I've called this Kli Yakar on Korach, a study in Midrash. What we're going to see today is a common feature of the Kli Yakar's commentary. However, it's something which I haven't usually showed you, and I'd like to explain why. From time to time, the Kli Yakar will point out a certain midrash connected to this week's Parsha, or any week's Parsha, and he'll show how that midrash is connected to the Parsha itself. The reason why I haven't usually shared such commentary with you is because it's not directly related to the flow of the narrative. And a midrash can take us in any direction away from the natural narrative of a Parsha. And so when studying Parshat Shlach Lecha, I would choose to focus on Parshat Shlach Lecha and not on side issues. And that would have been my preference for Parshat Korach as well. However, the Kli Yakar on this week's Parsha, when it comes to what he has to say about the actual story itself and the content of the Parsha itself, there isn't anything entirely unique or really life-changing in his commentary on Korach itself. However, he does bring up numerous midrashim in this week's Parsha. And so what I'd like to do is to use this week as an opportunity to learn about the Kli Yakar's approach to midrash and sourcing midrashim on the Parsha. You know, if I was to ask you, which week should we talk about Bikru Cholim, you'd tell me, hopefully, Parshat Vayera with Avram in his tent. And if I was going to ask you, when should we talk about Tzitzit, you might tell me, well, that's from the first paragraph of the Shema. If I was going to ask you when we should talk about Sara'at, you would say Tazria Mitzara. If I would ask you about forbidden relationships, you'd say that also earlier in the book of Vayikra, not in the book of Bamidbar. We're going to talk about all of these things today in the context of Parshat Korach, and we're going to see time and time again how the Kli Yakar views his role in explaining midrashim which appear at different points in the Torah. So we're going to start in classical familiar territory and we're going to branch out from there. We'll start at the beginning of the Parsha. Source number 1. Vayikach Korach ben Yitzhar ben Kahat ben Levi. Korach, the son of Yitzhar, the son of Kahat, the son of Levi, took V'Datan v'Aviram, and Datan and Aviram b'nei Eliav, the sons of Eliav, V'on ben Pelet b'nei Reuven, and on the son of Pelet, the children of Reuven. And the classic question which is asked by commentaries on this pasuk is, what did Korach take? Vayikach Korach, we're told Korach took, but we're not told what he took. What did Korach take? The next pasuk, Vayakumu lifnei Moshe, they arose against or before Moshe, V'anashim b'nei Yisrael chamishim u'matayim, together with 250 Israelites. And these weren't just any normal Israelites. No, they were Nesi'ei Edah, Kri'ei Moed, Anshe Shem, chieftains or princes of the assembly, leaders of the crowd, really famous people. Vayikalu al Moshe v'al Aaron, and they congregated against Moshe and against Aharon. Vayamru alehem, and they said unto them, Rav lachem, this is too much for you. Ki chol ha'edah kulam kadoshim, the entire assembly is holy. V'tocham Hashem, and Hashem is amongst them. Umadua titnasu al kahal Hashem. Why are you lifting yourselves up, elevating yourselves over the congregation of Hashem? And so this is the pshat. This isn't a midrash. The pshat is they say to Moshe and Aaron, we're all holy. We've all got Hashem amongst us. Why are you elevating yourselves to reach a higher level? So the Kli Yakar is going to start off with a classic question and then move on into the classic answers, and then the midrash. Source number 2, Vayikach Korach, Korach took ben Yitzhar ben Kahat ben Levi. Bekicha zo. When it comes to explaining this act of taking, ba'u harbe perushim. There are lots of different explanations. Ya'an, because kilo porash im kicha biyadayim o bedvarim. It's not said explicitly in the Torah whether Korach took something with his hands or bedvarim, or whether he took them, he captivated them with his words. And there are some explanations which we may be familiar with. V'yesh omrim, some people explain, shekol hasipor nimshach ad b'nei Reuven, that this continues until the children of Reuven, meaning when it says Korach took, it's an introduction to the entire first pasuk. Korach took Datan and Abiram, and I'll just show it to you inside so you understand. Vayikach Korach took Datan, Abiram, and On ben Pelet, the sons of Reuven. He took all of them together. And therefore, Vayikach Korach is an introduction to the pasuk. It's everybody who he took with him. That's one explanation. Now, why would he take these people with him? Shelakach lo lamachlokto al et bnei Reuven. He made a coalition for his machloket with the sons of Reuven. Kira alalaket elav komrei nefesh, because he wanted to gather together with him all despondent and bitter individuals. And he knew that they had an inner bitterness because the firstborn was removed from Reuven. Now, is that Moshe's fault that Reuven wasn't the firstborn? Did Moshe even meet Reuven? Even though this is generations ago, Yaakov is the one who removed the firstborn privileges from Reuven. Velo Moshe, it wasn't Moshe. Mikol makom, nevertheless, with a concept that all power should ultimately return to its original owners. They wanted to be acknowledged as the traditional owners of the Bechorah. V'yaskimu in Korach, so that's why they joined Korach. So a classic explanation. Korach took these people. That's how he built a coalition of people who had different claims. Fascinatingly, they had conflicting claims. They can't all be right, because if the Bnei Reuven should get the big jobs, it means that the Bnei Levi shouldn't. Nevertheless, that doesn't stop people gathering together for a bad cause. V'yesh omrim, a different explanation. Shelakach lo l'ta'ana et ben Yitzar. What did Korach bring? Korach brought his family tree. Korach brought his yichus. Vayikach Korach, what did Korach take? Ben Yitzar, Ben Kahat, Ben Levi, his generations. Kizot haita ikar ta'anato. This was his major claim. Lomar, he was going to say, Achi Abba Arba'a, my father was one of 4 brothers, etc. And he says, Ma'achar shani Ben Yitzar, because I am Ben Yitzar, mi ra'ui litol hashniya, Perush Rashi, as Rashi explains, who's supposed to take the next position? It is the shniya, it is the second person. So if you look at the first pasuk, the way you read it is, Vayikach Korach, Korach took Ben Yitzar, Ben Kahat, Ben Levi, his family tree. Korach took his yichus. What's this classic explanation? I'll show you very briefly. This isn't in the source sheet I sent last night. I just added this family tree this morning. If you look at the family of Levi, Levi has 3 sons, Gershon, Kehat, and Merari. If you look at the family of Kehat, Kehat has 4 sons, Amram, Yitzar, Chevron, and Uziel. And of those 4 sons, Amram's children are clearly the most prominent ones, Miriam, Aharon, and Moshe, with Aaron and Moshe each taking major leadership positions. And then along came a new position to be the Nasi, the leader of the tribe. So who should be next in line? Well, Miriam is Miriam, she's special. Aharon and Moshe, they've got what they've got. Korach is looking at the family tree and he's saying, hey, I'm Korach, the son of Yitzhar, the son of Kehat, the son of Levi. I am next in line because I'm the oldest child of the second son. But who does it go to? It skips all the way to the right to Elitzaphan, the son of Uziel. Korach's had enough. That's a classic explanation. So what does Vayikach Korach mean? Korach took his yichus as his argument. Korach brought along his family tree. One more classic explanation, V'yesh omrim shelakach Datan v'Aviram letzarfam elav. It's a reference not to all the Bnei Reuven, just to Datan and Aviram. Okay, so far we've seen classic explanations to a classic question. And now we need to slightly change the background music and change the mood as we move into the world of Midrash. We may have heard of this Midrash, but it's clearly a different style of explanation. The Midrash tells us as follows. Amru, they say, Vayikach Korach, Korach took, Malakach, what did he take? Talit shekulot chelet. Korach took a talit which was entirely made out of techelet. And the Midrash goes on to say that Korach came along to Moshe with a shaila. And he says, if I have a talit which is entirely tchelet, do I need to put a tchelet string on it? Do I need tzitzit on this talit? And Moshe said, yes, the halacha is you need to put some tchelet on it. And Korach made fun of him. And he says, wait a second, the entire talit is tchelet. Why do I need this extra tchelet string? Umasik, and now that midrash goes on and concludes, Shesha'al od, there was another question which was asked. By the way, in the Gemara, that wasn't Korach's shaila, it's his wife who came up with it. But anyway, moving on, there was another question which is, Bayit maleh sfarim. If you have a home which is filled with sfarim, and let's not think about sfarim in our sense, let's think sifrei Torah. You've got a home which is filled with sifrei Torah. Im chayav b'mezuzah, you have to put this little bit of parchment on the door if it's already filled with sifrei Torah. So Moshe was posed with these different halachic challenges. This is what Korach brought along to Moshe. That is what it says in the Midrash. And the Kli Yakar is going to ask, where does this come from? Why are we suddenly talking about tzitzit in Parshat Korach? And he says, actually, of the two, tzitzit and mezuzah, tzitzit is easier to explain. Bishlama tzitzit, I can understand why the Midrash would connect the story of Korach to tzitzit. Why? Because darash smuchin, because the juxtaposed sections of the Torah were expounded. Midasamach vayikach Korach leParshat tzitzit. The beginning of this week's Parsha comes immediately after the end of last week's Parsha, which is the section dealing with tzitzit. So the natural flow of the Torah is from tzitzit into Korach. And therefore we have the section of tzitzit, and then we're told, Vayikach Korach, Korach took, what did he take? He took tzitzit. So that makes sense, that Korach would have brought tzitzit. But the Kli Yakar asks about mezuzah, man dakar shmei. That's Aramaic. Who mentioned mezuzah? Why are we suddenly talking about a house filled with svarim? Where did that come from? And I'm sure there have been occasions where we have heard midrashim in the past, and we've had this kind of question. Where did the midrash get that from? And that's the question that Kli Yakar is asking here. Where did the midrash get to mezuzah from? And he goes on to say, V'nir eli, it appears to me, the mafikla, it is taken midichtiv from the pasuk later on. Because later on, this is just before the destruction, it says, V'datan v'aviram yatzu nitzavim petach ohalehem. Datan and Aviram emerged, standing at the entrances of their tents. Now the Kli Yakar asks, Lama leila mechtav petach ohalehem? What is the relevance of Datan and Abiram standing at the entrances of their tents? Ella, he goes on to explain, this is where the Midrash gets it from. Sheyatzu nitzavim, they emerged standing, lecharef ulegadef, to curse and to make fun and disparage al ha-mezuzah. They were pointing and making fun of the mezuzah shebepetach ohalehem, at the entrance of their tents. They were protesting at the entrance of their tents, meaning in the place of the mezuzah. So what he says is as follows. Korach al Parshat tzitzit. Korach argued based on the Parsha of tzitzit. V'datan v'aviram hosifu. Oh, the Datan and Aviram went further. Lachlok al mitzvat ha-mezuzah, to argue against the concept of mezuzah, sheba petach ha'oil, which is at the entrance of the tent. Ki amru, what were they saying? Shemoshe badam elibosh de mitzvot elu, that Moshe is just making it all up. That's the real protest here. They weren't interested. You can ask halachic questions, that's okay. But they were asking questions with an agenda, and they were trying to claim that all of this is made up. What are you doing? It doesn't make sense. Why would a tchelet talis need a tchelet string? Why would a room filled with sifrei Torah need a mezuzah? Moshe, you've made this all up. And he goes on to explain that there's a thematic connection. Sorry, Riva?
Did they have a room filled with svarim? Did Datan and Abiram have their house filled with svarim, their tent? That they should be able to come out like this and question?
Well, maybe they did. Maybe they did. And even if they didn't, what they're really talking about here is something else. And even if they didn't have physical Sfarim, they felt that they themselves were holy enough, which is what the Kli Yakar is going to explain now. And he says,
theoretical.
Yes, this was all thematically connected to their conspiracy, to the argument. As Rabbeinu Bachya explained, Kiamru, what they really saying? Just as an entirely tchelet talit has varonotenet shu patum tzitzit, logically it shouldn't have tzitzit. V'chein bayit malei svarim patum im zuzah, just as a house filled with svarim should be patum from a mezuzah logically. Kach bezman shekol ha'edah kedoshim einan tzrichim lemanhig. If the entire nation is holy, it doesn't need a leader. That's really what they were saying when they were talking about an entirely blue beged of tzitzit. They were talking about Am Yisrael, which doesn't need an extra leader. And when they were talking about a house filled with Sfarim, they were talking about themselves, that they don't need this mezuzah. They were saying, we don't need this, we're all holy, and Hashem is already among us. And he goes on to say, Va'od ramuz bazel omar. Also what's hinted here is to say as follows, She'ikar tam shtei mitzvot eilu. What's the point of tzitzit? What's the point of mezuzah? Liot la'adam kemazkirim et mitzvot Hashem. These are there to remind us of Hashem's mitzvot. Kamoshana Emar, as it says with tzitzit, uritem oto, you should see it, or you should see him with a big H. Uzchartem, as a result of seeing tzitzit, you remember all the mitzvot. V'chein ha-mezuzah, similarly, what's the role of a mezuzah? Kadesh yizkor et Hashem b'va'o v'tzeito. It is a constant reminder of Hashem in our lives, who we are, who we should be, the way we should behave, every time we enter or leave our abodes. And they're saying, why are you putting up these reminders everywhere? Uvizman shekol ha'edah kedoshim, if everyone is holy anyway, einan tzrichin ledavar hamaskir. They don't need a reminder. Ki belav hachi Hashem lenegdam, because if they're all holy, Hashem is always constantly opposite their face, tamid. Hu yitbarach v'chol mitzvotav, Hashem and all his mitzvot, ve'ein tzorech bahem, and you don't need them at all. Ki im lenashim shchichei elokim, who needs reminders? Forgetful people. If you put lots of reminders on somebody's fridge, and you put reminders in their phone, and you phone them to remind them of something, they're going to start thinking that you don't trust them. And that they're, that why do you keep reminding me? I know it's your birthday. Stop reminding me, whatever the issue happens to be. So what they're saying to Moshe is, if we're all holy, we don't need you. Just like a completely blue talit shouldn't need the extra string, and just like a home filled with Sfarim should not need a mezuzah. Now,
Rabbi Danny,
yes,
is this after Chet HaEgel and Chet HaMeraglim?
Yes and yes.
Okay.
Yes and yes. Chet HaEgel is...
Especially Chet HaEgel, when clearly the people did need a reminder because they forgot very quickly.
Yes. So fair enough. So we're past Chet HaEgel. And if we understand this in the immediate aftermath of Chet HaMeraglim, then we're already in a situation of panic and despair and despondence, facing 40 years in the Midbar. Moshe's already a bit of a lame duck leader. So yes, that context is helpful. Now, what have we seen so far? If you already knew this Midrash and you knew what the Talit represented, I haven't taught you anything this morning. But what I would like to point out is that what the Kli Yakar does here is he takes a Midrash and he shows how the Midrash emerges from the Psukim. And he takes this floating concept of a mezuzah and he nails it down into the Parsha based on the fact that Datan and Aviram were the entrance to their tents. What he's showing is that Midrashim are not random, but that Midrashim emerge from the text. Let's look at another example of the same thing. After all this happens, how does Moshe respond? Source number 3, Vayishma Moshe. Moshe hears, Vayipal al panav, and he falls on his face. It's not the first time he's done that. Now, some people say it was in prayer and prophecy. Let's just assume he falls on his face in despair. Now, the background Gemara to what we're going to see now is in source number 4. Vayishma Moshe vayipol al panav. Mashmu Hashama. What did Moshe hear? Moshe, we're told Korach takes. We don't know what he took. We're told Moshe hears. We don't know what Moshe heard. What did Moshe hear? Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, Rabbi Yonatan, they said as follows: Shechashduhu me'eshet ish. Moshe heard that people were suspicious that he had been involved in forbidden relationships with married women. Shne'emar, as it says in Tehillim, "Vayikanu leMoshe b'machaneh," they were jealous of Moshe in the camp, or they warned their wives about Moshe. And the Midrash says, he says it here, Amar Bishmol bar Yitzchak Melamed teaches us, Shekol echad vechad kanai tishto Moshe. Each one warned his wife about Moshe and was jealous about his wife, making sure she didn't go near Moshe. Shne'emar, and as a result, we see in the Torah, Moshe yikach et oil v'natalo michutz lemachaneh. Moshe took his tent and put it right outside the camp, so no one could ever potentially be suspicious of Moshe of having forbidden relationships. That's what the Midrash says. The Midrash says that Moshe heard the rumors that he'd been involved with married women, and he just falls on his face. Now, the question which the Kli Yakar is going to ask, which I'm sure some of you might be asking as well, is where on earth does this Midrash come from? Where in Korach is there anything to suggest that Moshe has been engaged with such forbidden relationships? And again, what we have is the Kli Yakar coming along to take a Midrash and to show how it can emerge from the text. Source number 5. Vayishma Moshe vayipol al panav. Moshe hears and he falls on his face. B'masechet Sanhedrin, as we've just seen, the Gemara Amru Shmuel Shama Malamed Shechashdu be'eshet ish. They were suspicious of him, that he was engaged in relations with married women. Shne'emar, as it says, Vayikanu Moshe b'machaneh. As we saw, second paragraph, and the Kli Yakar says, V'davar zeh, this concept is rachok min haseichel me'od. This is incredibly far-fetched. U'medivrei Kabbalah lo yalfin, and that's not part of our received tradition. Ki man yema shechashad zeh haya bizman zeh davka. What is there to suggest that such a claim existed specifically at this time? Ki ein lo remez b'pasuk. It isn't hinted at in the psukim. But it must be hinted at in the psukim. And therefore the Kli Yakar will explain how maybe it's explained in the pasuk. Al kain omer ani, therefore I explain. Shabal Agadazo, the author of this midrash, Ratzah lefaresh pasuk, wanted to expound the following pasuk, which is the claim, Ki kol ha'edah kulam kedoshim, the entire assembly is holy. Umadoa titnasu al kahal Hashem, why are you elevating yourselves above the congregation of Hashem? And the Kli Yakar asks, Ma inyan hakdusha el ha'itnasut? What is the connection between kedusha, sanctity, and hitnasut, raising yourself above others? Elavadai kachama Korach leMoshe. What's Korach telling Moshe? Lefi shematzinu b'masechet Sotah, it says in the Gemara, Amru Chazal, our sages tell us, Kol hamitga'er, we have a known concept from the Talmud, that anybody who is too proud, L'sof nichshal be'eshet ish, will end off having forbidden relationships with a married woman. V'makom acher amru, and also it says, Kol hamitga'er, anyone who's too proud, ki'ilu ba'al kol ha'arayos, as if they've slept with all the forbidden relationships. V'yadua, what's this got to do here? It's known. Shebachol makom shetimtza kedusha, wherever you find kedusha, wherever you find sanctity, sham timtza geder erva, that is where you will find the boundary for forbidden relationships. Ki ha'arayot mechalalin hakedusha, because forbidden relationships are what profane that which is holy. So we have Parshat Kedoshim, how to be holy, and it's all about forbidden relationships. The concept of kedusha is about not engaging in forbidden relationships. So Korach says to Moshe, Kol ha'edah kulam kedoshim. We are all holy. We are all careful about our relationships. Umadua titnasu. Why do you want to become so powerful? Because power leads to corruption, or what he's saying here is, from the Gemara, that power leads to tripping yourself up with forbidden relationships. This is what Korach is saying from his own logical conclusion. We're all kosher when it comes to forbidden relationships. And therefore, why are you elevating yourselves to such power and control and pride? You're going to end up tripping up with forbidden relationships. v'tachalalu kedushat ha'am, and you are going to make the sanctity of the people profane. Uvezeh hevin Moshe, and it's from this that Moshe understood shekorach chashdo, that Korach was suspicious of him. She'nichshal be'eshet ish. Lachach le'emar, that's why it says vayishma Moshe. Moshe hears vayipol al panav. He just falls on his face. And so what do we see again? What we see is a midrash where something seems incredibly far-fetched. And why on earth would you think that Moshe would have been involved in a forbidden relationship? How does that at all emerge from the text? And the Kli Yakar tries to show how within the words of the Parsha, together with Talmudic understandings of certain phrases and their connotations, such a concept can emerge. And along the way, he teaches messages. Yes, Riva?
Isn't this a little bit difficult, considering at the end of Parshat Ba'alotcha, we talk about the anivut of Moshe Rabbeinu, to be able to say now that he was mitga'eh?
Yes, if what you're saying is that what Korach is claiming is difficult, then you're on the good side. Yes. So yes, what Korach is saying is ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Especially
claim
following
that Moshe is mitga'eh, to claim that he's being arrogant, that he's lifting himself up. Yes, Moshe is the most humble person of all time. People who behave in such a way, such as Korach, it doesn't have to be true what they're saying. It just has to be convincing. And he's an opportunist. He's taking advantage of Moshe, who's at an all-time low in terms of his popularity ratings. Moshe has never polled so low at the end as he has at the end of Parshat Shlach Lecha, and Korach is now taking advantage. But yes, it's absolutely ridiculous. Now the point of a midrash is not to tell us what's happened in the Parsha necessarily. The point of a midrash is to teach us lessons along the way.
Yeah.
And therefore, the Kli Yakar goes on to say that the point of this midrash here is to warn us about the dangers of power and position. And he says, why does power and position lead people to engage in forbidden relationships? He says as follows, I believe the reasoning is, anybody who's proud in this way, he wants to be the highest that can be. And somebody who's reached that level of pride and arrogance cannot take it if anybody else has control over something. He says a person can reach a level of control and the desire of control where they cannot handle the fact that there is something which is beyond their control, where there's something which they cannot have. They feel that they must have whatever or whoever they want. That's why, of all the forbidden relationships, the one which is mentioned here, the one which is the most attractive or luring to such an individual, is a married woman. V'lo shar arayot, as opposed to other forbidden relationships. And therefore this midrash is very particular. You'll end up tripping up with a married woman. Because when somebody reaches that level of power, you just look for every type of control. Whatever anyone else controls. You just want to conquer everything under your hand. So that you are in complete control. And therefore he says there's something corrosive about power, something corrosive about control, that you could have somebody, and it's not unheard of in history, that very powerful men have done some very terrible things, because you reach a stage of power where you believe that you're just above the law and where you can't take the fact that there's something which you can't control. You're in charge of a country, so why can't you be in charge of the secretary next door or whatever it happens to be? There's a certain power and authority and control and pride which can be corrosive and dangerous for an individual. So Korach was wrong, but there's something in his claim which is true. And not about Moshe, but about the danger of power and control. And that's what the Midrash is trying to teach us here. And the Kli Yakar says, V'zeh perush yakar ma'od. This is a very precious explanation. Hein b'Parsha Zoh, both of this week's Parsha, Hein b'Lashon Gemara, and of the Gemara. So we see the Kli Yakar enjoys playing this game with Midrash. It's not pinned tail on the donkey, it's pin the midrash on the parsha, and it's a game which the Kli Yakar very much enjoys. Our next example. We come along to the big test in this week's parsha in source number 6. Vayomer Moshe, Moshe says, "B'zot teidun ki Hashem shlachani la'asot et kol ha'masim ha'ele ki lo melibi." Moshe says, this is how you're going to know that it's Hashem who sent me to do all of these things, and it doesn't come from my heart. I didn't make it up. And this is the test. Im kamot kol ha'adam yemutun eile. If these individuals die a natural death, ufkudat kol adam yipaked aleihem. This is the phrase we're going to focus on. The pikud of every person will be upon them. What does vayifkod mean? Ufkuda, it could mean a remembrance, a visit. It could mean an end. We're going to have to explain that. But let's say for now, they reach the end of all other people. Then, lo Hashem shlachani, Hashem didn't send me. However, the imbriya yivra Hashem, if Hashem creates something, ufatztah adama et piyah, the land will open up its mouth, uvalautam, and swallow them, et kol asherem, and all they have, v'yardu chaim she'ola, and they go down to the grave alive. Then vidatem ki natzon Hashem ha'elet Hashem, that these people have angered Hashem. That's the big test. We know this story from this week's parsha, and the midrash, as we're going to see now in the Gemara, takes us somewhere where we're going to have to ask ourselves again, where did this come from? Source number 7, the Gemara says in the Nedarim, Amar Reish Lakish says, Remez lebikur cholin min haTorah minayin. Where can we find the mitzvah of bikur cholim in the Torah? If this was a quiz question, I think most of us would answer, as I started off the shiur, by saying, Parshat Vayera. What does Reish Lakish say? Shene'emar, as it says, in this week's parsha, im kemot kol anashim yimutun eile ufkudat kol adam, etc., from the pasuk which we just read, that if the followers of Korach die a natural death and they reach a natural end, then you'll know that Hashem didn't send Moshe. That, according to Reish Lakish, is the source in the Torah for visiting the sick. The Gemara asks the obvious question, my mashma, how does one thing suggest the other? Amar Rava says, Im kamot kol ha'adam yumutan eile. If these guys die like other people, shehein cholim, meaning if they become sick, umutalin ba'ari satan, and they spend time in their beds, uvnei otam uvakrin otam, and therefore, what's the normal process? People visit you. Bikur cholim is part of the natural process at the end of somebody's life. Mahabriot omrim, then what will people say? Lo Hashem shalachani, Hashem didn't send me. So just to understand the Gemara at face value for now, the Gemara is saying that from the fact that Moshe suggests that the people of Korach's rebellion would have to die on a natural death, from the fact that he mentions a natural death, it means that under natural circumstances, people visit you, and that's where you learn Bikur Cholim from in the Torah. And some of you are not convinced by this midrash, which is good, because that means the Kli Yakar has got a job to do here. Now, Rashi makes it slightly stronger here, because Rashi explains that it's actually in the pasuk itself, because it says, Ufkudat kol adam, the pikud of every individual. What does lefaked mean? Lefaked means to visit as well. So the pasuk itself, it's not just that if they'd have a natural death, then naturally somebody would visit them, but the word ufkudat kol adam could actually mean a reference to bikur cholim shebnei adam mevakrin otam. So if we have a concept and we're looking for a hook, so the midrash is our coat and we're looking for a hook in the parsha to hang this midrash on, then Rashi's found a hook in that pasuk because the word visit can appear in that pasuk. Well, the Kli Yakar is now going to do it. He's going to explain how this hook is actually a natural hook, and there is actually a thematic connection here. And along the way, whether you're convinced or not that Bikur Cholim comes from Parshat Korach isn't what's important here, because what's important about a midrash is the lesson that the midrash wants to teach us. And along the way here, we're actually going to learn something about Bikur Cholim. Source number 9. We'll go on this journey with the Kli Yakar. Im kamot kol adam yimutun ele, these people pass away a natural death. But Masechet Neder Reish Lakish Lamed Bekur Cholim Al Torah Shneimar, etc. And then we have what Rashi says. We can skip to the next paragraph. That's what we've just seen. Now the Kli Yakar says there are two benefits of Bikur Cholim. V'hinei makom iti lefaresh b'kidazo b'derech acher. He says, I want to explain this concept of pekida in a different way. Ki yesh shnei minei to'elet bebikur zeh. There are two different advantages to be gained from Bikur Cholim. And I think that when the Kli Yakar is talking about Bikur Cholim, we need to keep in our minds that less than a year ago, the Kli Yakar was very, very ill and he didn't think he was going to get through. So the Kli Yakar here is talking as somebody who has recently survived a terrible illness, an experienced illness. So in my mind, when he talks about the experience of visiting someone who's sick, this is a survivor of an illness talking soon after their illness, describing the meaning of such a visit. Ha'echad, purpose number one of visiting the sick, hu shemavakrim acharei tzrachav shel choleh, that you visit and you inspect the needs of the sick person. So in Gemara times, it tells a story of Rabbi Akiva who visited somebody and he just swept the floor, and then because he noticed that this guy was living in squalor, I think it was Rabbi Akiva. And it's just the fact that you're visiting the person helps them. Nowadays, we'll focus more on the emotional benefits of visiting the sick. So aim number one of visiting the sick is for the sick person. Hasheni, but there's a second advantage of visiting the sick. And the Kli Yakar says, Hu letzorech haholchim shama. It's for the benefit of those who are actually doing the visiting. Why is it good to visit the sick? Ki kamoshe tov lalechet el beit avel. He says the same way that it's advantageous to go to a shiva house. Kedei shachayiten el liba, so that those who are alive will take the messages for themselves, i.e., just as there's a benefit of going to a levaya, being exposed to mourning in terms of, for ourselves, being able to consider our priorities in life and remember who we are, where we're from, when we're going, that it's a very sobering experience to consider our own mortality. Kach tov lalechet el hacholeh. Similarly, it's good to visit someone who's sick. Ki al yedei zeh, as a result, you'll come out and you'll think about your own life. You'll consider your own life and you'll look at your own deeds and your own priorities when you're exposed to terrible illness. Because who walks into the visit? Someone who's strongly confident, who's far away from tzedakah, who is oblivious to any fear of God. And their uncircumcised heart is completely covered over, cemented over to even consider the consequences, what's going to be in the future. And you think that it's all nonsense and will end up being worms. That's the person who goes in to visit. But he says there can be an element of shock, and even without the shock, an element of visiting somebody who's sick, which can make the person who makes that visit emerge and consider, wow, how lucky I am that I have my health, or how many blessings I have, or let's try and remember what's truly important in life, which is our health, not the other things we're running after. There are so many things, lessons that a person can take from visiting someone who is unwell. It doesn't mean that we have to create museums of the ill for the benefit of the visitors, and the needs of the sick person need to come first. But nevertheless, he says, such a visit is advantageous for the visitor and the visitee. And he says, V'zehu, what is this? This is kudat kol ha'adam. This is the end of all person, of every man. Ki asofu pkudat kol adam, with this word pkudat, because that's what the end is. Yipaked aleihem will be visited upon all of us. Yipaked lashon zechira, and yipaked is an expression of remembrance. This phrase, pkudat kol adam, is a common phrase in our Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur liturgy as a reference to our lives and taking stock of our lives and understanding that which is important to our lives. And therefore, in the Pasuk, when it says, if these people die, and ufkudat kol adam, everybody's pikida will happen to them. It's a reference not just to the visit, but to the emotional experience of the visit. That just like the English word visit means both to physically visit and to visit a concept, to consider a concept. That's what it says in the pasuk. And that's now. Why would that be relevant? Why would the fact that Korach and his rebellious mob would not be the beneficiaries of Bikur Cholim be relevant at all to whether Moshe is a true Navi or not? He goes on to say, V'ratzal omar, meaning, Im yipaked v'zachet alehem kudat kol adam, meaning, if it is remembered as a result of them, our mortality, hainu hamita, meaning, if these people serve as a reminder to others of their own mortality and what their priorities in life should be, that would be as a result of people visiting them. Then as a result of the Korach's rebellious mob, they would be a source of merit for the Rabbim, because everybody would visit them and they'd say, oy vey, and this should help us remember what's important in life. And therefore there's a merit, a zchut, which Korach and his mob would receive as a result of being visited. And as a result, ve'einan mekablin onesh kemidatan, then they wouldn't be receiving their proper punishment. As kedivreihem. Sorry, kimidatam as kidivrehem, ken hu shelo Hashem shalachani. And then that would be true, yes, that Hashem didn't really send Moshe, because their process of their demise would bring benefit to others, which isn't a correct end for someone who challenges Moshe incorrectly. Aval, however, in Bria Yivra Hashem, etc., if Hashem creates something, shelo yamutu kederech kol haolam, and they die an unnatural death, va'az lo yizacher el yadam kudat kol adam, then people will not consider their lives as a result of these individuals. Now, the Kli Yakar is very, very aware of the question which is inside some of your heads, but you don't want to unmute yourselves to ask. And the question in some of your heads might be, surely, if the earth opens up its mouth and swallows people, that would also teach some people some lessons about priorities in life. Would that not be a process of tshuva for everybody who knows about it? Until this day, on this Monday morning in Melbourne, we have the schut of the sons of Korach, not his sons, sorry, of the followers of Korach. We today are still receiving schut thousands of years later. Is that not a schut? Do we not learn the lesson from that event? The Kli Yakar says, no. Ki mechidush lo yalfinan. We don't learn lessons from a chidush, from something which is that novel. It is so strange and so far away, none of us are going to think, you know what, let's be careful with our behavior just in case the ground swallows us up today. It is too far-fetched for us to actually pay attention. So actually, we're not going to reconsider our lives as a result. It wouldn't cross any of our minds that we would suffer that end. And therefore, because the sons of Korach would die, not the sons of Korach, sorry, because Korach's mob would die in a way where other people cannot benefit and take lessons, that's how we know these people angered Hashem. No good or merit should come from these individuals. So far, today, we have seen 3 examples of how a midrash says something which may appear to be far-fetched, and the Kli Yakar has shown how that concept emerges from the Parsha. We've seen this with Bikur Cholim just now. We've seen this with the concept that maybe Moshe had forbidden relationships, at least that's in theory that was claimed. And we've also seen it with the concept of mezuzah, because they stood at the entrance to their tent. Now we're going to see a 4th and final example of the Kli Yakar doing it in this week's Parsha, which therefore I believe teaches us about the Kli Yakar's approach to midrash in general, which is that the Kli Yakar believes that every midrash emerges from the text. You know, my Rosh Yeshiva, or one of my Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Yaakov Meidan, is very big on this when you have midrashim in the Gemara, like midrashay halacha. Sometimes in the Gemara, you'll learn something from an extra letter, or an extra word, or a repetition of a phrase. And you could say, okay, that's just the way things are learned. That's just a process, whether you understand it or not. Halacha l'Moshe Misinai. But Rav Meidan was very, very big on always explaining every midrash and always teaching how the midrashim emerge from the text itself. They aren't random concepts disconnected from the text. And the final example we're going to see today is about the aftermath of what happened. Because Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe le'emor, Hashem says to Moshe as follows. Emor Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen, say to Aaron, Elazar the son of Aaron the Kohen, Vayarem et hamachtot meben hasreifa, he should pick up these fire pans from the burning, from the fire, Vayta'esh zreihala, throw away the fire, ki kadeshu, why? Because these pans have become sanctified. Et machtot hachatim ha'ele b'nafshotam, the pans of these people who sinned with their souls. V'asotam rekuei pachim tzipui lemizbeach, make them beating panels as a covering for the mizbeach. Ki hikrivim lefnei Hashem, because they were brought before Hashem, vayikdashu, and they were sanctified. V'yu le'ot lebnei Yisrael, they should be as a sign for the Bnei Yisrael. So it appears we are supposed to learn something from this event. What happens? Vayikach Elazar Kohen et machtot hanachoshet, so Elazar, the Kohen, took these copper pans, asher hikrivu hasrufim, that the burnt ones had offered, vayarka'um tzipui lemizbeach, and he beat them as a covering for the mizbeach. Zikaron levnei Yisrael. This is as a remembrance, a reminder for Am Yisrael. Leman asher lo yikrav ish zar, asher lo mizer Aaron hu l'haktir ktoret levnei Hashem, that no foreign individual who is not from the offspring of Aaron should approach to offer up ktoret before Hashem. V'lo yech Korach v'cha'adato, you should not be like Korach or his assembly. Kasher diber Hashem biyad Moshe lo, as Hashem spoke in the hand of Moshe to him or about it. From here, says the Midrash, we learn about tzara'at. Leprosy. We've just read about leprosy, apparently. Kli Yakar. Let's see what's going on here. Source number 11, Rashi says, Kasher deber Hashem biyad Moshe lo, as Hashem spoke in the hand of Moshe to him. Umahu biyad Moshe. What does it mean in Moshe's hand? Velo katavin doesn't say that Hashem spoke el Moshe to Moshe. Remez lecholkim al kahuna. This is a hint to let us know that if anybody challenges the kahuna, shelokin b'tzarat, their punishment is tzarat. K'moshe laka Moshe biyado. The same way that Moshe was punished on his hand, Shena Emar, as it says all the way back at the beginning of the book of Shemot, Vayotziah, v'hinei yadom mitzarat kishalek, he took out his hand and it was white as snow. So, Hashem spoke in the hand of Moshe is a reference to tzarat. From here we know that if you challenge Moshe, you get tzarat. That's what the Midrash says. And you might think, that Midrash is a little bit far-fetched. What's tzara'at got to do with Korach? What's tzara'at got to do with challenging the kahuna? What is going on here? And again, we have a hook. The hook is the word biyad, in Moshe's hand. A reference to Moshe's hands take us back to the tzara'at, which was on Moshe's hand. But what the Kli Yakar feels is a responsibility to strengthen that hook thematically, to explain why naturally the result would be tzara'at. Source number 12. V'lo yecha Korach v'adato, etc. Pirush Rashi shelo yilakeh b'tzara'at k'mo shelaka Moshe b'tzara'at biyado. That's based on the Gemara in Sanhedrin, which we've seen in Rashi. V'kan haben shoel. He's stolen that from Seder night. This is where the child is going to ask, Ma inyan tzarat shel Moshe el hacholek al hakuna. What on earth has challenging the kahuna got to do with Moshe's tzarat? If you want to bring a case of tzarat, to learn from a case of tzarat that you shouldn't challenge Moshe, there's a better case. What should you have brought? You should have brought Miriam's tzarat, which was at least similar to Korach's machloket. Because he challenged the kahuna. When Korach is challenging the kahuna, he's challenging Moshe's prophecy. And he's saying, Lo shalachacha Hashem, Hashem didn't send you. Miriam's tzarat was similar. Korach challenged Moshe's elevated status as an Navi, and Miriam also did. She'amra, Miriam said, Harak ach b'Moshe diber Hashem. Wait a second. Does Hashem only speak to Moshe? Halo gam banu diber. Doesn't he speak to us as well? There's a bit of a connection here between Miriam's behavior, Korach's behavior. Miriam gets tzarat. If you challenge the Kuna, you should get tzarat. Kli Yakar says that would have been a very nice midrash. But that's not our midrash. The midrash doesn't take us back to Miriam. V'chein amar Korach. Korach was similar to Miriam, because he said, we're all holy, like Miriam said, Aaron and I were both holy. We all heard Hashem's voice on Sinai. What on earth has Moshe's tzarat on his hand at the beginning of the book of Shemot got to do with Korach's machloket? And the Kli Yakar, you can tell from his introduction here that he's really going to enjoy his answer to this question. Because he poetically says, V'ata ana, sana einecha ora'eh, lift up your eyes and see. Ki hineni mekarev ha'inyanim, I'm going to bring these two matters together. And actually, v'hayu la'achadim biyadecha, they will be united in your hand. V'yilakeh hadomeh b'domeh, and the two similar things will just strike a match together. And there you will have a proof with clear vision that if you challenge Moshe's nevuah, you get tzarat. So it appears that the Kli Yakar really enjoys the pin the midrash on the text game. And now he's going to play it, and he's going to say, because it says in the Gemara in Shabbat, page 97a, if you make false claims against innocent individuals, you will suffer a physical punishment. Minalan, where do you know that from? From Moshe. Okay, let's build this up. Generally speaking, the way justice works is, the punishment somebody receives when they make a false claim against somebody is the punishment they intended on inflicting on the other individuals. And therefore, if A makes a false claim about B because he wants B to suffer a certain punishment, the just punishment would be that A receives the punishment that he conspired to give to B. That is the way justice should work. In Cain, therefore, HaChoshed, the one who makes a false suspicion, receives the same punishment which would have been suitable for the one of whom he falsely suspected a certain activity. In Mayad Avamet, if it was true. So what took place here? Now that we've put up all our mathematical equations. Moshe chashadet Yisrael. What happened at the beginning of the book of Shemot? Moshe made a false accusation about us. What did he say about us? He said that we're not going to believe in his own nevuah. Moshe says, Moshe claims that we're not going to accept his nevuah. That we're going to say to Moshe, who are you? And Hashem didn't speak to you. When Moshe says to Hashem, they're not going to believe me and they're going to claim that I'm making this all up, that's exactly what Korach did. Because he said, Hashem didn't appear to you, and you're making it all up. In this week's Parsha, when Moshe says to them, I'm going to prove that Hashem sent me and I didn't make this up. What's happening is that Moshe is suspecting us that we are denying his prophecy. That's what happens in this week's Parsha. We are denying Moshe's prophecy, at least Korach and his Mabah. We're saying Hashem didn't appear to you. You're making it up. In order that you should flex your power over us. So, again, if A suspects B of something falsely, the punishment A receives is the punishment which B would have received if the suspicion was true. What happens at the beginning of Shemot? We see Shenilka Moshe b'tzara'at. What punishment does Moshe get at the beginning of Shemot? Moshe gets tzara'at for what? Al shechashta b'ma she'ein b'hem, because he made a false claim about us. Shema mina, we learn from that tzara'at she'ilo ya davar emet, that it was true. Shayu Yisrael machshim nevuato. If Moshe in the book of Shemot at the beginning correctly said that we denied his nevuah, then as Yisrael lokin b'tzara'at zeh, the punishment we would have received is tzara'at. Moshe's tzara'at is proof that the correct punishment for challenging kahuna is tzara'at. And therefore he received tzara'at because he made a false claim against us. Umikan ra'aya brura, says the Kli Yakar. This isn't a far-fetched midrash. We have a clear proof. Shacholek ala kahuna, if you challenge the kahuna, loker b'tzara'at, your punishment is tzara'at. Because if you challenge the kahuna, you're challenging Moshe's prophecy. And you're saying that Hashem didn't appear to him to give him the authority to give the priesthood to Aaron Davka. If you challenge the kahuna, you're challenging Moshe. V'zeh Perush Yakar. He enjoys this and he says, this is a Perush Yakar. From the fact that Moshe gets tzara'at for falsely accusing us of challenging his authority, it shows that the correct punishment for challenging Moshe's authority is tzara'at. Now, why would tzara'at be the correct punishment? But tzara'at biyad davka, k'mosh amru chazal, because our sages told us, ketiv mavet b'chayim biyad halashon. It says in Proverbs that life and death are in the hand of the tongue. Now, I don't know about your tongues, but my tongue doesn't have a hand on it. Life and death are in the hand of the tongue. Does the tongue have a hand? Ella, no, it comes to teach us. Ma hayad meimit. Just as the hand can kill, af halashon meimit, the tongue can also kill. V'siman ledavar, and if you like word games, korach, the word korach, Rashi Tevot stands for keshet romach cherev, a bow, a spear, and a sword. Al Shem Shneimar, it says, Bnei Adam Shnehem Chanit, the Chitzim Leshonav Cherev Chada. The teeth of humans are like spears and arrows, and their tongues are a sharp sword. Meaning the hand and the tongue go hand in hand, or they go hand in tongue. The two go together. Just as the hand can kill, we have to understand that our tongues can also kill, and our tongues can also create great destruction. So that's why tzara'at on the hand is an appropriate response to behavior of the tongue. And now the question which might be in some of your heads. If we have now beautifully, Perush Yakar explained that the correct punishment for for challenging the kahuna is tzara'at, why doesn't a single person in Parshat Korach receive tzara'at? Good question, no? Korach should get tzara'at, and his followers should get tzara'at. Why does nobody get tzara'at if we're saying that tzara'at is the correct punishment? And he's going to give a halachic answer. Why didn't Moshe get tzara'at? Why didn't Korach get tzara'at like Moshe did? Because we have a rule in halacha which is kim lei b'darabah minei. What that means is you give somebody the bigger punishment. I.e., if chas v'shalom A kills B, A gets put to death for stabbing B. Because A gets put to death for stabbing B, A does not have to compensate B for the bruising caused to his body, because he's being put to death. And A doesn't have to compensate B for tearing into his clothes when the knife went through on the way to the body, because when somebody is guilty of numerous punishments, halachically, we only give them the greatest punishment. That's not necessarily a reflection of human justice. It's just a reflection on the limits of human justice, and that's the only thing a Beit Din can do. You can only give somebody one punishment, and you give them the biggest punishment. So why doesn't Korach get tzara'at? Korach was deserving of tzara'at, but because he got a bigger punishment, he didn't get the smaller punishment along the way. Sharei kafar be'ikar Korach completely rejected Hashem. V'torat Moshe, and Torat Moshe. V'ratzah levatel asrara Hashem izeh hatzad natan adin she'yamin habluim. And therefore Korach deserved to be amongst those who were swallowed up underground because of his behavior, and therefore he didn't get the smaller punishment. What have we seen today? What we've seen today is 4 separate occasions in this week's Parsha where the Kli Yakar comes across a midrash which you may have thought is completely disconnected from this week's Parsha. What's Korach got to do with Bikur Cholim, with Moshe and forbidden relationships? What's Korach got to do with a mezuzah or a talit? What's our last one? What's Korach got to do with tzara'at? And on each and every occasion, the Kli Yakar enjoys showing how those midrashim emerge from the psukim. And what we can learn from here in general is that whenever we come across a midrash, which might at first glance appear to be somewhat far-fetched, and you might think, what on earth has this midrash got to do with the pshat in the pasuk? We shouldn't just discount it as well as just a midrash. No, we have to understand that midrashim emerge from the psukim, and we need to reread the text again and again, and perhaps learn the whole of Shas for all these Talmudic references until we're able to piece together how the midrash reached its conclusion, because midrashim, even though they may seem far-fetched, are very much hanging on and connected to the text of the Torah itself. That's what we've seen in the Kli Yakar's approach to midrash today. Is Tamara's hand up for a question, or? If it isn't, please unmute yourself.
Sorry, a bit slow. I couldn't help when we were discussing about the hubris, the concept of a leader potentially getting involved in illicit relationships. I couldn't help thinking about King David and Bathsheba, and I wondered, here is a case of being warned about this sin by omission, because Moshe clearly wasn't that way, but the Midrash is taking the opportunity to warn about that. And I'm just wondering, does the Midrash deal with King David and Bathsheba in light of this? Or
that particular Midrash, I don't believe, makes that direct connection. But I think that in human history and more recent history, unfortunately, we don't have to look very far for examples of people who, due to receiving so much power, felt that they could control things and take advantage of things which really weren't theirs to take advantage of. So unfortunately, the corrosive nature of power to also lead people to behave in sexually forbidden ways is unfortunately not uncommon when certain people receive a certain level of uncapped control and power.
I was just thinking that, at the time when the people asked Hashem or the prophets for a king, whether this issue of unbridled power and the consequences of it came up in the Pshat or the...
So certainly the dangers of humans receiving too much power is certainly referred to there in that context. It's certainly a danger, and that's why a king can't have too many wives, or too many horses, or there are certain things a king has to be careful about, so it's not taking things too far. There has to be a certain level of moderation in the behavior of a leader and the amount of power and control which one person can have. All right. Have a wonderful day and a great week, and a Chodesh Tov, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Shabbat Tov.
Thank you very much.
Chodesh Tov.
Chodesh.
Chodesh Tov.
Thank you, Rabbi.